The scorching desert sun painted Blackwater Creek in shades of amber and gold as Beatrice Rogers wiped sweat from her brow, her breath catching at the sight of the dusty town that would become her prison. She had nowhere else to go, no one to turn to, and the letter in her hand promised employment at the Silver Dollar Saloon. Hope had led her here in 1875, but as she stood before the weathered building with its peeling paint and crooked sign, that hope began to wither like a desert bloom. "You must be the new girl," a woman with rouge-stained cheeks said, her eyes sweeping over Beatrice's travel-worn dress. "I'm Vivian and you're late." "The stagecoach was delayed by a broken wheel," Beatrice explained, clutching her small carpet bag. "I'm Beatrice Rogers." "I was told there would be a position as a waitress available." Vivian's painted lips curved into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, honey, we'll make you earn your keep, all right. Come on in." The interior of the saloon was dim and hazy with tobacco smoke. Men sat at tables playing cards while others lined the long bar. The piano in the corner played a jaunty tune that seemed at odds with the heaviness in Beatrice's heart. "Walter," Vivian called out, "your new girl is here." A stout man emerged from a back room, his vest stretched tight across his rounded belly. His eyes, small and calculating, assessed Beatrice like she was livestock at auction. "Not bad," he muttered. "Could use some color in those cheeks, but the men won't mind, they like the innocent ones." Beatrice's stomach twisted. "Sir, I was told this was a respectable establishment, that I would be serving food and drinks." Walter laughed, a harsh sound that scraped against her nerves. "And so you will, Miss Rogers, you'll serve whatever my customers want to buy." The realization of what kind of establishment she'd walked into struck Beatrice like a physical blow. She backed toward the door, but Walter's meaty hand clamped around her arm. "Don't even think about it," he hissed. "You owe me for your transport here, and you'll work off that debt plus interest. Besides, where would you go? A pretty little thing like you wouldn't last a day alone in these parts." Tears threatened, but Beatrice forced them back. She would not give him the satisfaction of seeing her cry. "I won't, I can't." "You will," Walter said firmly. "Vivian will show you to your room. You start tonight." The following weeks blurred together in a haze of misery. Beatrice served drinks, endured wandering hands, and deflected propositions with practiced smiles that never reached her eyes. She learned to move quickly between tables, to dodge the grabbing fingers of drunken minors, and to ignore the pitying glances from the other girls who had long since resigned themselves to their fate. Walter kept a careful ledger of her debts, room and board, the dresses she was forced to wear, even the soap she used to bathe. The numbers only grew, never shrank, and Beatrice realized with growing despair that she would never be free. It was a Tuesday afternoon when he walked in, bringing the scent of sun-warmed leather and open spaces with him. The saloon was nearly empty, most patrons still at work in the mines or out on the range. Beatrice was wiping down tables when the door swung open, and she looked up to see a tall figure silhouetted against the bright light outside. He removed his hat as he entered, revealing hair the color of wheat fields and eyes that reminded her of the sky before a storm. Unlike most visitors to the Silver Dollar, he moved with a quiet confidence that commanded respect rather than demanded attention. "Afternoon," he said, approaching the bar where Walter was tallying the previous night's earnings. "I'm looking for work." Walter barely glanced up. "Don't need any help," the stranger nodded thoughtfully. "Name's Matthew O'Connor, just rode in from Colorado, heard Blackwater Creek was growing, thought there might be opportunities." "Not here," Walter grunted. Matthew's gaze swept the saloon, pausing briefly on Beatrice. Their eyes met, and something passed between them, a spark of recognition, though they'd never met before. She quickly looked away, resuming her task with trembling hands. "Well, if you hear of anything, I'll be around," Matthew said, placing his hat back on his head. "Much obliged for your time." Beatrice felt his eyes on her as he left, but she didn't dare look up again. Men like him, decent men, didn't linger in places like the Silver Dollar. He'd find work elsewhere and forget all about the sad-eyed girl in the too-tight dress. But Matthew O'Connor returned the next day and the day after that. He'd order a single whiskey, sip it slowly while observing the room, and leave without causing trouble. Walter grew suspicious of his presence, but couldn't turn away a paying customer who kept to himself. On the fourth day, as Beatrice delivered his drink, Matthew spoke quietly so only she could hear. "You don't belong here," she nearly dropped the glass. "Pardon me. This isn't where you're meant to be," he clarified, his voice gentle. "I can see it in your eyes." Beatrice glanced nervously toward Walter, who was occupied with a raucous group of miners. "I have nowhere else to go," she whispered. "Everyone has choices," Matthew replied, "even when it doesn't seem like it." "Not everyone," Beatrice said bitterly. "Now if you'll excuse me, I have other customers." She walked away, her heart pounding. How dare he judge her situation when he knew nothing about it? And yet, his words had stirred something inside her, a forgotten ember of defiance that she thought had been extinguished. That night, one of the miners, a brute named Harlan, grabbed her as she passed, pulling her onto his lap with alcohol-fueled strength. "Come on, darlin', Walter says you've been here long enough to start providing extra services," he slurred, his hands pawing at her skirts. Beatrice struggled against his grip. "Let me go, I don't provide those services." Harlan's face darkened with anger. "Walter said you would." Suddenly, Harlan's weight was gone as he was yanked backward, chair and all. Beatrice stumbled to her feet to see Matthew standing over the fallen miner, his expression calm but his eyes blazing with controlled fury. "The lady said no," Matthew stated, his voice carrying across the now silent saloon. Harlan scrambled to his feet, reaching for the knife at his belt. "This ain't your business, stranger." Walter emerged from the back room, his face flushed with anger. "What's going on here? Your new man assaulted one of my girls," Harlan accused, pointing at Matthew. "He's not one of mine," Walter said dismissively, "and the girl's just playing hard to get." "You paid for a good time, you'll get one," he turned to Beatrice. "Take Mr. Harlan upstairs and make him happy." Beatrice felt the blood drain from her face. This was the moment she'd been dreading since her arrival. I can't," Walter's eyes narrowed. "You will, or you'll find yourself out on the street without a penny to your name. Your debt to me isn't even close to being paid off." "What debt?" Matthew asked, stepping forward. "Stay out of this, Cowboy," Walter warned. "This is business." Matthew's gaze never left Walter's face. "I'm making it my business. How much does she owe you?" Walter named a sum so outrageous that Beatrice gasped. It would take years to pay off such an amount, even if the ledger stopped growing today. Matthew didn't flinch. "I'll pay it right now." The saloon erupted in murmurs as Walter's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. "You can't." "I can and I will," Matthew interrupted, pulling out a leather pouch. "Count it out." Walter's greed overcame his surprise. He grabbed the pouch and emptied its contents onto the bar gold coins and folded bills that represented more money than Beatrice had ever seen in one place. As Walter counted, Matthew turned to Beatrice. "You have a choice now. You can stay or you can leave. It's up to you." Beatrice stared at him, unable to comprehend why a stranger would do this for her. "Why?" "Because everyone deserves a chance at freedom," he answered simply. Walter finished counting, his expression souring. "It's all here," he admitted reluctantly. Matthew nodded decisively. "Then she's done here. Miss Rogers, would you like to collect your things?" The entire saloon watched in stunned silence as Beatrice, trembling but resolute, nodded and hurried upstairs to her small room. She threw her few personal possessions into her carpet bag, changed out of the garish dress into the simple traveling outfit she'd arrived in, and descended the stairs to find Matthew waiting by the door. "You don't know me," she said as they stepped out into the night air. "I could be a terrible person." Matthew smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his face. "I'm a good judge of character, Miss Rogers, and I know trouble when I see it. No one deserves to be trapped like that." "Where will I go?" she asked, the enormity of her sudden freedom overwhelming her. "I have a proposition," Matthew said. "I wasn't entirely truthful about my circumstances. I own a small ranch outside of town. It's not much, but I need help running it. The position would include room, board, and fair wages." Beatrice regarded him skeptically. "Why should I trust you?" "You shouldn't," he replied candidly. "Not yet. That's why we'll stop at the preacher's house first. He and his wife need a housekeeper while she recovers from a broken leg. You can stay there, work for them, and decide if my offer is genuine." True to his word, Matthew took her to the small church at the edge of town. Pastor Green and his wife welcomed Beatrice warmly, asking no questions about her previous employment. That night, for the first time in weeks, she slept without fear. The following days brought a new routine. Beatrice helped Mrs. Green with household chores, cooked meals, and slowly began to feel like a person again rather than property. Matthew visited occasionally, bringing fresh vegetables from his garden or game from his hunting trips. During these visits, Beatrice learned more about him, how he'd come west after the war, how he'd saved and scraped to buy his small plot of land, and how he hoped to build something lasting. "Why did you really help me?" Beatrice asked one evening as they sat on the church porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant hues. The truth this time, Matthew was silent for a long moment. "My sister," he finally said. "She ended up in a place like that after our parents died. I was fighting in the war, couldn't get to her in time by the time I found her." He trailed off, the pain evident in his voice. Beatrice reached out impulsively, placing her hand over his. "I'm sorry. When I saw you there, with that same look in your eyes, trapped, desperate, but still fighting, I couldn't walk away. Not again." Their friendship grew over the next few weeks as Beatrice slowly regained her confidence and trust. Matthew never pressed his job offer, giving her the space to make her own decisions. When Mrs. Green's leg healed enough for her to resume her duties, Beatrice found herself at another crossroads. "I've been thinking about your offer," she told Matthew during one of his visits. "I'd like to accept, but I need to know exactly what the job entails." Matthew nodded seriously. "The house needs tending, cooking, cleaning, that sort of thing. I'm often out working the land or with the cattle, so having someone to maintain the household would be a great help. In return, you'd have your own room, meals, and a fair wage that I'll pay weekly, not hold against some imaginary debt. And if I want to leave, you can go anytime with my blessing and a reference for your next position." Beatrice studied his face, looking for any sign of deception, but found only earnestness. "All right, Mr. O'Connor, I accept." The O'Connor ranch was modest but well-maintained. The main house was small but solidly built, with a kitchen garden out back and a barn housing 2 horses, a milk cow, and several chickens. Fields stretched behind it, and in the distance, Beatrice could see a small herd of cattle grazing. "It's not much," Matthew said, watching her take it all in. "But it's home." "It's beautiful," Beatrice replied honestly. After the cramped, smoky confines of the saloon, the open spaces and clean air felt like paradise. Life at the ranch settled into a pleasant rhythm. Beatrice took charge of the household, discovering a talent for organization and a joy in creating a true home. Matthew worked from dawn till dusk, but always returned with a smile and appreciation for the hot meals and clean house that greeted him. They shared stories over dinner, Beatrice of her childhood in St. Louis, her parents' death from influenza, and her desperate journey west in search of work. Matthew spoke of his time in the war, his search for his sister, and his dream of building a prosperous ranch. "I want to create something good," he told her one evening. "Something that lasts, something I can be proud of." "You're well on your way," Beatrice assured him, gesturing to the flourishing homestead around them. The seasons changed, summer heat giving way to autumn crispness. Beatrice's position evolved from employee to partner as she took on more responsibilities, learning to manage the accounts and even helping with the livestock when needed. It was during the harvest festival in town that Beatrice first realized her feelings for Matthew had grown beyond friendship or gratitude. They'd attended together, and as she watched him laughing with the townsfolk, respected now as a successful rancher rather than the suspicious stranger who'd arrived months before, her heart swelled with an emotion she didn't dare name. That same day, Walter spotted her in the crowd. He approached, his expression a mix of anger and calculation. Well, if it isn't Miss High and Mighty," he sneered. "Playing at being respectable now, are we?" Beatrice straightened her spine. "What I'm doing is none of your concern, Mr. Walker." "It is when you're swindling honest men," he retorted. "Your cowboy friend paid a pretty penny for your company. Shame he's only getting housekeeping services." "That was his choice," Beatrice replied evenly. "And mine." Walter leaned closer. "The whole town knows where you worked, girl. You think anyone will ever see you as anything but a saloon dove? You think that rancher will ever see you as more than a charity case or a convenient bedwarmer?" His words struck deep, voicing the fears that kept her awake at night. Before she could respond, a shadow fell over them. "Is there a problem here?" Matthew asked, his voice deceptively calm. Walter smirked. "Just catching up with an old employee, reminding her where she belongs." Miss Rogers belongs wherever she chooses to be, Matthew stated firmly. And right now, she's chosen to be with me, Walter snorted. For now, maybe, but men like you don't marry girls like her. When you're done playing savior, send her back my way. I'll always have a position open for her. Matthew's hands clenched into fists, but Beatrice placed a restraining hand on his arm. He's not worth it, she murmured. With a last contemptuous look, Walter disappeared into the crowd, leaving behind a cloud of doubt that followed Beatrice home. That evening, she was unusually quiet as they sat by the fire. Matthew watched her with concern in his eyes. Don't let him get to you, he finally said. Walter's just bitter because you escaped his clutches. Beatrice stared into the flames. But he's right about one thing. The town will never let me forget where I worked, even if I only served drinks. People's memories are short when you give them something else to talk about, Matthew assured her. And anyone who judges you for surviving difficult circumstances isn't worth your time. And what about you? She asked, barely audible. Do you see me as a charity case? A good deed to make up for your sister. Matthew's expression grew serious. Is that what you think, that I brought you here out of pity? Why else would you help a stranger, pay off an enormous debt, give me a home? Beatrice, he said gently, using her given name for the first time. At first, yes, I wanted to help because you reminded me of Sarah. But that's not why I asked you to stay. That's not why I wake up every morning grateful that you're here. She looked up, meeting his gaze. Then why? Because you're the strongest person I've ever met, he answered simply. Because you fill this house with light and life. Because watching you rebuild yourself from nothing has been the greatest privilege of my life. Beatrice's heart pounded in her chest. Matthew, I know it's too soon, he continued quickly. You've only just found your independence, and the last thing I want is for you to feel obligated or trapped again. But I need you to know that I see you, truly see you, and I admire everything about you. The silence that followed was charged with unspoken feelings. Finally, Beatrice rose from her chair and crossed to his side. With trembling fingers, she reached out to touch his cheek. I see you too, she whispered. The man who gave me back my freedom, the man who never asked for anything in return, the man who makes me feel safe for the first time in years. Their first kiss was tentative, a gentle exploration of newfound territory. When they parted, Matthew's eyes were bright with emotion. I don't want to rush you, he said. We have all the time in the world, Beatrice smiled. For the first time in my life, I actually believe that. Their courtship progressed slowly, with respect for Beatrice's past and hope for their future. The town gossips eventually found new subjects for their wagging tongues, and the memory of Beatrice's brief time at the Silver Dollar faded as she established herself as a respected member of the community. Winter brought heavy snows that isolated the ranch for weeks at a time. During these quiet days, their bond deepened. They read to each other in the evenings, played chess by the fire, and shared their dreams for the spring planting. Matthew taught Beatrice to ride properly, and she showed him how to make her mother's famous apple dumplings. It was during one such snowbound evening, with the wind howling outside and the fire crackling cheerfully in the hearth, that Matthew knelt before her with a small wooden box in his hand. I've been carrying this around for weeks, waiting for the right moment, he confessed. But I'm beginning to think there's no perfect time, only the time we make perfect ourselves. Inside the box was a simple gold band set with a small pearl. It was my mother's, Matthew explained. I've kept it all these years, hoping to give it to someone who embodied her spirit, her kindness, her strength, her capacity for love. Beatrice's vision blurred with tears as he continued. Beatrice Rogers, you came into my life like a miracle. Will you stay in it as my wife? Will you build this dream with me, side by side, for all the days we're granted? Yes, she breathed, barely able to speak through her joy. Yes, I will. They were married in the spring in the small church where Beatrice had first found sanctuary. Pastor Green officiated and Mrs. Green wept happy tears as she remembered the frightened young woman who had arrived on her doorstep less than a year before. The townsfolk came, including some who had once looked down their noses at Beatrice. Even Vivian from the saloon attended, slipping away without Walter's knowledge to witness this proof that escape was possible. As they exchanged vows, Beatrice thought of how far she had come from desperate and trapped to standing freely beside the man she loved, choosing him as he chose her. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Pastor Green declared, and the small church erupted in cheers. Their life together was not without challenges. The drought of 1877 nearly devastated their crops. A gang of rustlers targeted their growing herd in 1878. Beatrice suffered a miscarriage in the winter of 1879 that left them both heartbroken. But they weathered each storm together, drawing strength from their bond. And in the spring of 1880, their patience and perseverance was rewarded with the birth of a healthy daughter they named Hope, in honor of the emotion that had sustained them through their darkest times. As Beatrice nursed their child one evening, Matthew sat beside them, his face full of wonder. "Do you ever think about how close we came to never meeting?" he asked softly. "If I hadn't walked into that saloon that day." Beatrice smiled down at their daughter, then up at her husband. "I believe some paths are meant to cross, no matter how unlikely they seem." "You were my second chance, Matthew O'Connor, and I was yours." "You were more than that," he corrected gently. "You were my salvation." 5 years after their wedding, the Silver Dollar Saloon burned to the ground in a fire that consumed half the buildings on Blackwater Creek's Main Street. No lives were lost, but Walter, having gambled away most of his profits, left town in disgrace. The O'Connor Ranch, meanwhile, flourished. They added onto the house, built a larger barn, and increased their herd. Their daughter grew strong and spirited, joined 2 years later by a son they named Daniel. On the 10th anniversary of the day Matthew had walked into the saloon, they hosted a celebration for the entire community. Their home, once a modest bachelor's dwelling, now stood as one of the most prosperous ranches in the county. Friends and neighbors gathered to share in their good fortune and to honor the couple whose love story had become something of a local legend. As the festivities wound down and their guests departed, Matthew and Beatrice stood on their porch, watching the sunset that painted the sky in familiar hues of amber and gold. "Was it worth it?" Beatrice asked suddenly. "Spending all that money to free a stranger?" Matthew pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Best investment I ever made," she laughed, leaning into his embrace. "And to think I once believed you were just passing through." "I was," he admitted, "until I found a reason to stay." They stood together, watching their children chase fireflies in the gathering dusk, their home glowing with lamplight behind them, a beacon of warmth in the vast western landscape. The journey from that smoke-filled saloon to this peaceful homestead had been long and sometimes difficult, but neither would change a single step of the path that had brought them together. In the distance, a coyote called to the rising moon, its lonely cry a reminder of the wilderness that still surrounded them. But Beatrice Rogers O'Connor was no longer afraid of what waited in the darkness. She had found her light, her strength, her home in the arms of the cowboy who had once said simply, "She's done here," and changed her life forever.